everybody. I think we'll get started. We gave people a little bit of extra time because I know for myself the construction traffic out there on the roads is horrible. It's like getting here myself. So I watched last month's recording and realized in all my excitement about getting this started that I didn't even introduce myself. I had someone come up at the end, and most of the faces in the room I know, but one person in particular I didn't know, and she had no idea who I was. So I'm going to introduce myself and the agency as well, along with our new professional sign. So I'm Jody Higgs. I am the Caregiver Support Counselor for the South Fraser region here, and I support and train foster parents from Ladner and Delta right to the Aldergrove border. And like I said, I know most of you. I work for Pacific Community Resources, or PCRS as we're often called, and we are a long-standing not-for-profit agency in the Lower Mainland who works with vulnerable individuals and families in a variety of different programs to better serve and grow healthy communities and relationship. So I'm excited today to announce Dr. Lapointe is going to speak again. And I have put some upcoming dates. We're going to break for July and August, but we have September until March actually booked through. Here's our September, October, and November dates that will be coming up. And I don't have topics yet for them, but we'll get that to you through email between now and then. So I'm excited about today, very timely. I've had lots of response to the announcement of what we're talking about, which is technology use and social media use and our children and our youth. I think it's very timely with a week and a half away from summer vacation. So here's Dr. Vanessa Lapointe.
2 weeks ago, I feel like it was 2 weeks ago, there were 10 students who had been accepted into Harvard. And you can imagine, right, what it is to be accepted into Harvard. Like you live your entire life. I feel like if you're one of the kids that got accepted into Harvard, you've probably lived your whole life being groomed for that moment. And I understand that Harvard sets up a Facebook page for all of its new incoming students. And something happened on that Facebook page where there was a splinter page set up. And that splinter page, that's okay. The splinter page became a place where these students sort of like began to, they really began to share the most horrific, vile, awful stuff. Now these are the cream of the crop, these kids, right? They come from probably years of having been sort of molded and sculpted and trained and how to be just so that you can get into Harvard. So how is it that a group of kids like that can deviate, I assume, so far from what they had been raised to know was right versus wrong? And it turns out that Harvard figured out that this was happening, and they've actually revoked the acceptance of 10 of those students. And so they've lost their dream of going to Harvard because of how they were acting and interacting on social media. So then the question then becomes, like, how did that happen? A, what was the mechanism at play behind it? And what can we do as adults who are raising up children to ensure that the children in our care don't walk down a similar kind of a path? And so we're going to explore through the course of the workshop this morning some of the things that may have been at play in the Harvard chat room. And I'm going to walk you through why technology has so gotten in the way of child development. And it isn't just a matter of kids sitting down and spending time on screens. That's not what the issue is necessarily, although that is a problem. The issue really is how they're interacting with those screens and the way that that is interfering with how they're meant to actually be interacting with the world around them, and more than just the world around them, the human beings in that world around them. And so we're going to kind of wander around that as an issue, and then I'll come back to the Harvard kids at the end, and we'll apply everything that we've learned to understanding why what happened in that Harvard chat room actually happened. Okay, so here's the problem. The average 7-year-old will have already watched screen media for more than 1 full year of 24-hour days. By age 18, the average young person will have spent a full 4 years of 24-hour days in front of a screen. Elementary age children now use an average of 7.5 hours per day of entertainment technology, which is the combination of TV, video games, being online, movies, cell phones. Preschool age children, 3 to 5 years, watch an average of 4 to 5 hours of TV per day. And Canadian infants, 0 to 2 years, watch an average of 2.5 hours per day of television. And 25% have televisions in their bedrooms. So that's a problem, right? If you rewind and think back, it's weird for me to say, like, even when I was a kid, because I feel like that was like just yesterday, and it was. But when I was growing up, like, we didn't even have a television until I was 8 years old. And I remember my dad had made us a yellow picnic table that we used to use in our playroom. And I remember the day that I came home from school and the yellow picnic table had been set up in our living room. And there was a television on it. And we were all just like, whoa, like what happened? But we had no cable, so there was one channel. And we used to watch the Disney movie on Sundays at 6 p.m. Did anybody else do that? Yeah. So you must be all in the 40 to 50 age bracket. So that's very different from what kids have access to now. And we are sort of swimming around in a world where all of it's very available. And the latest research coming out, and in terms of recommendations being put forward by all of the experts that be, is that we have gotten, I'm going to get to those recommendations in a moment, but we've gotten incredibly off track. Think about what your day would have been like, how you would have interfaced with the world, the kinds of experiences you would have had, the things that you would have tasted and felt and played with and done, and the interactions that you would have had with actual living human beings where you had to stare into the whites of their eyes and like actually interact. And then think about if you're replacing that with 7.5 hours a day of a screen. That changes how your brain is growing, that changes how neural networks get wired, and most importantly, it changes how your soul is growing. It changes the core of who you are because you're not having the kind of developmental experience that nature intended. 2/3 of children report that their parents do not restrict their access to technology, and 75% of these children have devices in their bedrooms. So imagine that you have unlimited access and it's in your bedroom. So there's no accountability, there's nobody watching over your shoulder, there's no other humans around because you're sequestered away in your bedroom. The average teen sends over 3,000 text messages per month. A large part of this generation's social and emotional development is occurring while on the internet and on cell phones, and 90% of children between the ages of 8 and 16 have viewed porn online, and most of it accidental, right? And so that which has been seen can't be unseen. And once it's in, it's in. And it's one thing to be exposed to that as sort of a warped understanding of sexuality, but a whole other thing for children who have very sensitive temperaments and very sensitive dispositions, because those kinds of images become really sticky and can be actually really undoing and very upsetting. And so these are the things that we're sort of grappling with and having to kind of figure out, how do we get in underneath. Now, the flip side of this problem is that 39% of parents use 11 or more hours per day of screen media during their leisure time. Parent technology use means that we're not connecting with our children, right? As we attach to our screens, we detach from one another. So this little baby, I love that this baby comes because I have this like living example at all times about how it's supposed to go down. So right now this little baby's being fed, and the distance between babe's face and caregiver's face is like, I don't know, 12 inches, about that. Which is ideal in terms of babe being able to make eye contact and the sort of connection and the communication being able to flow. Now imagine you're feeding babe and you've got a hand on a phone. What's baby looking at now? Like your neck.
Necks don't do the same thing for people as eyeballs, right? Eyes are the windows to the soul. And so as we're connecting to our screens, we're actually disconnecting from our children. And that disconnection, of course, becomes incredibly alarming, particularly if alongside all of that, it isn't just that our kids are running amok and not being supervised, but they are then connecting to their screens, right? And so the hierarchical relationship that big people are meant to have with little people in order for brains to grow the way that nature intended and for souls to grow the way that nature intended becomes kind of obliterated. So everybody's now connecting to electronics instead of connecting to human beings, and that's sort of the epicenter of where things go incredibly sideways. Now, let's talk about, so we talked about how horrible screens are and how they're getting in the way of everything. Let's spend a few minutes talking about what kids actually need for healthy development to go down, and what are kind of the, it's gonna be okay. I need a new computer.
And the phrase?
Yeah. Sometimes if I just like pat it and say nice things to it, it comes back. It's not coming back. We're gonna see if it. Let's see how this goes.
Do you want to boot it up again?
I'm gonna give it a minute to think. I don't even have the spinning rainbow ball. Like, at least then you know the computer's alive. It's just nothing. It's just nothing.
That's different from a kid.
What's that?
That's different from a kid.
This is the problem with screens. Do you follow? So let's connect with each other for a few minutes and we'll see if the screen comes back online. So the first thing that kids need in order to grow up in the best possible way is that they need to be in connection with their special big people. And so we talked at the last workshop, hands up how many people were at the last workshop? We talked about why that relationship is so central and so necessary to not just healthy child development, but to development period. Because without that relationship, you will not develop. And in fact, at the most extreme end, if that relationship is not working for a child, they could die. You can feed them and water them and shelter them and clothe them, but without that relationship working for them, they actually can develop failure to thrive and die. And so children need to be in connection with big people. Full stop. That's a central part of how healthy child development goes down. The second thing that kids need is that they need to move. They need to be on the go. They need to be up and moving around and running around and climbing around and doing all of those kinds of things. First of all, because it gets other parts of development happening the way that nature intended. But secondly, because it does really cool things in your brain chemically. So when you're on the move, as opposed to sedentary, you get sort of frequent or more frequent spurts of the happy chemical, serotonin, which is going to make your spirit sort of lifted up and allow you to have a little bit more sort of emergent energy in terms of desiring to be in and of the world and engaging with that world. And so when kids are on the move, this allows for this to play out really naturally, and that was what nature intended. Our ancestors were on the move about 37 kilometers a day. I don't do that every day. I move every day, but I don't do that kind of movement every day. So imagine now, if our kids are sitting all day, how different that is in terms of development, not just of like gross motor and all of that kind of stuff, but all of the squishy stuff that's going down in the brain as a result of that kind of movement. The third thing is that kids need rough and tumble play. And this is particularly so when they are younger and coming on up into sort of the middle elementary age. And there's a few reasons they need that. First of all, they need it just in terms of developing their proprioceptive sensibilities, and so interacting with the world around and being able to have kind of that feedback is actually a really important part of development. There's a reason why 3- and 4-year-old children come at you and throw their bodies at you and want you to chuck them all around, because they actually need it developmentally. But the other piece of that is that some interesting things in terms of the dynamics of the relationship play out in that kind of play, right? And so when children are allowed to engage in that rough and tumble kind of play and be on the go, they're not only developing in terms of the gross motor and all of that piece, but they're also developing in terms of their interactional skill and being able to have that kind of relationship play out. The fourth thing is that kids need nature. And we talk now about nature deficit disorder and how because we're not out in nature and we're not out in the fresh air, we're not out communing with the trees, which sounds hippy-dippy, but the reality is the science around that's all very solid, that we actually are meant to have time in nature, that we are seeing this whole movement now coming forward called the rewilding movement, where we need to rewild our children and get them back out in nature and get them eating dirt and climbing trees and doing all of these kinds of things, because all of that becomes so important for development. And again, it goes back to the brain. The things that are happening in the brain when you're out in nature are very different from the things that would be happening in your brain when you're sitting on a couch engaging with a screen. And we know through neuroplasticity that the more you have access to certain things, the more your brain gets good at doing that naturally, right? And so if you want your brain to be good at producing serotonin and regulating your emotions, you need to be outside and you need to be moving around, because that's going to sort of allow those networks to wire up in a better kind of way. So when all of those things are in place, not only do brains grow the way that nature intended, but hearts and souls grow the way that nature intended. And you can see by looking at all of those things that on every single point, screens are in the way for the children of today, right? So that's what we need to figure out. All right, guys. I might just need a moment. I don't know if you want to. Okay. Drum roll. Right? All right then. So, as I was saying, these are all of the things that we need in order for healthy development to play out. Screens are getting in the way of all of that. Now let's talk about what we need in order for optimal brain growth to occur for kids. So with that healthy development, what's going on? So we've talked through how kids need all of these things to be happening, and I made mention several times as we went through that about what was going on in the brain, and that cool things were happening in the brain as all of that was going down, right? So let's talk then about what's happening in the brain. So with that kind of map for a healthy child development, we've got processes at play neurologically that are also central to the child growing up and becoming who they were intended to be. So the first thing is that when we have that kind of healthy development playing out for kids, there's an attachment dance that begins from we all the way on up, where the interaction and the human connection that's playing out is actually soaking into the neural networks. And so what happens then is as children get sort of unsettled by life or unsettled by their day or unsettled or fussed in a moment about whatever it is, then they have a big person come alongside and calm them and nurture them and soothe them. And that results in a regulatory core down in the base of the brain that's wired up to be good at self-regulation, right? And so if you have that kind of a connected child development where you've got big people swooping in around you all the time to settle you and calm you and right you, then you will have a regulatory core that becomes very good at self-soothing, self-calming, regulating kinds of things. Now, that regulatory core sits at the base of the brain. Layered up in about 6 layers on top of that is the cortex, or the outer parts of the brain. Now down here is emotion, regulation, that kind of stuff. Up here is rational thought, cognition, intellect, problem solving. Now the secret to a solid structure is a solid foundation. And so your regulatory core forms the foundation of your brain. What if your regulatory core is all dysregulated? This gets all weeble-wobbly, right? And if it's all weeble-wobbly, then how great are you going to be at making good choices? Problem solving, right? Finding your way through life, you're not going to be as great as it because you're all as great at it because you're all locked down in the regulatory core, right? And so when kids get to interact with real human beings and have the kind of life that they were supposed to have, i.e. not connected to technology, but rather connected to humanity, the regulatory core settles in via the attachment dance in the way that it's intended. The cortex settles in the way that it's intended, because now it has a really solid foundation that it gets to sit on. And children then develop the capacity for self-control neurologically. It becomes hardwired into their brains and a part of who they are. And in addition to all of that, in the cortical layer, so the brain actually develops in terms of cortical thickening. If we use cortical thickening as a proxy for brain maturation, it's developing in a wave-like manner, starting at the base of the brain here and pushing forward. And so as your interactions with the world around you kind of play out, it's going to affect how that push forward actually gets laid down in your brain, right? Now let's imagine that you're spending a lot of time playing World of Warcraft, which is a really hip and happening game if you're into online interactional kinds of games, right? So let's imagine you're playing that, and let's imagine that you're playing that for like a lot of hours every day. Your brain is in constant scan and search mode. Because when you're in that game, you're constantly scanning and searching. That's the whole objective to surviving the game, so you don't get killed, right? You've got to be planful about all of that, but it's a constant scan and search, scan and search. How many of you have sat in your social media feeds, you don't need to answer out loud, and done this?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Scanning
Scan and
searching.
search. Scan and search, right? None of that is focused, targeted attention in a sustained kind of way, right? Now imagine, I remember my youngest sister, when she was little, had this imagination second to none. She was always in this fantastical play world and playing out all of these really interesting to her scenarios. And I remember one day we were getting ready for dinner, and so my parents had called us all to the table, but Laurel was really distracted by her play world. And what she was distracted by, she would have been, I don't know, let's say 3 or 4 years old at the time. She was sitting in the living room, and we had kind of like, it wasn't exactly shag carpet, but getting close, getting close. And she had 2 strands of the carpet hair that had become friends with one another, and were engaged in a really riveting conversation, right? Sustained, targeted, focus and attention. Very different from scan and search, right? Now, if your brain is in scan and search for hours and hours and hours a day, the average child 7.5 hours a day, and we know through neuroplasticity that your brain gets good at what it's practicing, right? So if it's practicing scan and search, what is it going to be good at? Scan and search. And if it's practicing sustained, focused, targeted attention, what's it going to be good at?
Sustained, focused, targeted.
Well done. Right? Now put that brain down in a math classroom circa grade 4. How does it look? Scan and search brain is not doing well in math class. Sustained, targeted, focused attention brain can handle math class, right? So guess then what we call scan and search brain.
ADHD.
We do, right? We call it ADHD. We like to medicate it. The issue there is that it's actually not the same core causal pathways that have led to that scan and search. It has nothing to do with your caudate nucleus, right? Which is implicated in ADHD. It's all frontal prefrontal cortex that just got wired up in a scan and search way instead of targeted, sustained, focused attention. And so if we aren't on screens, if we're out in nature, if we're engaging in rough and tumble play, if we're connecting with our big people the way that we are supposed to be, if we're out moving around in the world and having the kind of childhood that we were meant to be having, this is what goes on in the brain. All these wonderful things. You have a solid regulatory core, you have a sound cortical layer, rational thought, intelligence, problem solving, the capacity for self-control is there, and you're able to sustain focus and attention. Now without optimal brain growth and development, what are you going to look like?
You're gonna look fidgety. You're gonna look inattentive. You're gonna be constantly in scan and search. And you're gonna need a lot of motoric upregulation. So motoric upregulation, let's see if anybody's doing it right now. Nobody's doing it yet, but you might be by the end of today. I'll be watching you. So motoric upregulation is when your brain, your brain naturally senses that you are not engaged, you are not online, you are not quite activated in the brain up to the level that you need to be in order to sustain focus and attention. And so what it does is it likes to kind of take care of that for you. And so by the end of today, if you start to be getting tired or it's a struggle for you to sustain your focus because we've been at this for a couple of hours, what you'll see when you look around the room is people will be maybe bouncing a foot or spinning their, can anybody do the pen spin? We're coming to that. Or you might be wiggling in your seat. Whatever it is, you're getting your body kind of like engaged in these rhythmic little movements to try and get your brain online. Doesn't work well in math class. Enter the fidget spinner. Right? And so that's the thing, is if we have those kinds of fidgets that are being used as a learning tool, not distracting to other kids, successful in getting your brain stimulated and upregulated, then fantastic. Bring it all, and let's do that. We recommend fidgets for kids that struggle with sustained focus and attention all the time, because we know neurologically that's how the body works. Like, that's what it wants. The fidget spinner craze has become a whole other beast. Now it's about collecting and glow in the dark and light up and multicolor and who's got the most and blah. That's not a learning tool because it's become distracting to self and distracting to others. And so then that's a whole other thing. All right. Now, optimal emotional growth is also an important part. So if we have healthy child development playing out, where kids are getting to interact with their big people as they're meant to, they're out in nature, they're moving, they're engaged in rough and tumble play, those things that we talked about is necessary to healthy child development. Now we've just come through, well, this will be what happens in the brain if all of those things play out. Let's now talk about what happens in terms of emotional growth if all of those things play out. If you're having that kind of a childhood where you get to sort of experience all those sorts of things, you're going to emerge from that kind of a childhood with an actual sense of self. Like, who are you? What defines you? What do you love? What do you not love? Why do you love those things? Why do you not love those things? Right? When you're out in your world and you're tasting it and touching it and feeling it and interacting with people, you actually develop a sense of who you are, a sense of yourself. In addition to that, you'll develop a sense of worth. Like, you matter. Because you see your place in the world. You see how that affects other people. Right? How other people affect you. You really come to have sort of this grounded awareness of self-worth and that you matter. And then the third thing is that you'll develop a capacity for social reciprocity, which means that it's like serve and return. And so we put something out, and then something comes back. And as a result of whatever came back, we recalibrate, and we put something out, and something comes back. Kids are starting to, this little one is learning this dance right here in this moment, right? That little one, by the way, 700 new neural connections being formed every second. No pressure. But she's getting loved on, is it a she? It's funny, I just assumed that.
Yeah.
Is she in pink, or did I just make that sweeping
No,
assumption?
she's in yellow, but she's pink. That's right.
Well, maybe that's fine. And so she just put out a little like sound, and now she's getting bounced. So she's being responded to through the senses, through contact and closeness, proximity. There's noises flowing into her ear that are very soothing. There's movement that's very soothing, and she's wrapped up in warm, squishy arms, right? So when that happens, she's getting sort of that serve and return. She's like, "Murr, murr." Is that good? And then she got a little love back. That's the return. And now what's happened? Do you see the gift you are to me? So brilliant. So brilliant.
So then that plays out like every day, all day for the next, I don't know, 18 years. And you really fine tune what the dance is. What does that make you good at as an adult? Being a big person to another little person eventually. It creates in you the capacity for developing deep and meaningful relationships with other human beings. Now, we are a social species by design, which means that without the capacity to engage in deep and meaningful relationships with other human beings, you're not going to be okay. You might be surviving, but you certainly won't be thriving. And so this sort of social reciprocity is incredibly important. And when kids get the kind of childhood that nature intended, that goes down for them as well, right? So now we've talked through, if kids get the kind of healthy childhood that nature intended, their brains are going to be awesome, and their souls, their hearts, their emotional selves are going to be awesome. The problem, of course, is that screens are getting in the way. Attachment to technology is detaching children from humanity with consequent increased incidence of childhood psychological and behavior disorders, often accompanied by the prescription of psychotropic medications. And so we're medicating a lot of children unnecessarily because screens have interfered with how their brains got wired up, right? It not only creates the facade of attentional kinds of issues like ADHD, but also can lead to things like anxiety, depression, all of that kind of stuff, because you're having a very altered existence. You get that, right? How many of you know Chris Rowan? She's an occupational therapist, a pediatric occupational therapist from the Sunshine Coast, as it happens. If you go into pretty much any of the elementary schools on the Sunshine Coast, you will see that she has been there. And she has really created this incredible environment for kids to learn in. They all know what a learning tool is in terms of upregulation of the brain. They use chewing gum even as a learning tool, and they know that it's a learning tool, and they'll go and request it from their teacher. You walk into any of their classrooms and you'll see weighted bean bags around kids' necks or across their laps, because that's part of, in a proprioceptive way, getting their regulatory system settled. And so anyways, she's this really interesting human being, and it is her life's mission for people to understand how screens are wrecking our kids. And so you can go on her website, is, I think I have it at the end, but it's Zone In is her company, I guess. And she does all sorts of workshops. If you ever get a chance to go hear her speak, she's actually a really, really engaging presenter as well. So the way the brain gets wired up is there's sort of a number of things that have to happen, and there's a few kind of key rules or things to take to heart around making sure that brains and hearts get wired up as nature intended. And I'm not going to go through all of these, so that there are things like neural system changes use dependent, like use it or lose it, or the way that you're using it is the way that you're going to continue using it. So if that's working for you, then do that. But if it's not, then you need to alter your course. Right? We talked about the brain developing sequentially in terms of regulatory core. That's what gets laid down first. That's what's happening every day, all day for this little baby right now. And as that settles in, then the cortical layers get more focus and attention in terms of development. And if we go right down here, the human brain is designed for a different world than the world our kids are growing up in. It's designed for a more relational world. So even without screens getting in the way, our kids, the kids of today, are growing up in relationally devoid world compared to generations gone by, right? There's this wonderful film that I always think about when I'm talking about this called Babies. Anybody seen it? It's a documentary. And the fellow that put it all together, he spent a year traveling around to 4 different parts of the world, very different parts. So there was a baby in San Francisco, and there was a baby in Mongolia, and a baby in Africa, and a baby in Japan, I want to say. and it's very entertaining. The baby, so what they've done, there's no talking. And he just like flows into these people's lives, and he doesn't become involved in them. He's just filming what's happening, right? And then at the end of it all, he creates these chapters. So there's like the bathing chapter, and so you see like the 4 different worlds, what bathing looks like for those babies. And then there might be, I mean, there's all different things. And so there's the baby in Africa who's so squishy and lovely. And there's one scene where he's sitting in the sort of little hut that he lives in with his mama. And he's kind of, she's got her leg out in front of her. She's sitting on the ground and she's got her leg crossed so that she can bounce the baby on the one leg. And he's just like draped over her leg, and he's like super chill, and he's just like loving his little ride that he's getting from his mom, and he loves it so much and he's so comfortable that he decides he's just gonna poo all over her leg. And so he poos all over her leg, and she's like, meh, and she reaches over and grabs this kind of like dried out corn husk and like scrapes the poo off her leg and tosses the husk out this, like the window, the open window in their hut. Meanwhile, the baby in San Francisco is in a pair of like velour sleepers, and her daddy is vacuuming the carpet in their apartment, and the baby is rolling around on the carpet, and the dad decides that he should delint the baby's sleeper. So he gets out a lint brush and he's actually like delinting the baby, and this is like juxtaposed to like the poo, right? So this is the whole film plays out. And it's fascinating. When my youngest son was 3 or 4 years of age, I had just discovered this film, and I was watching it for a course that I was teaching, and he sat with me and he was just like enthralled with these babies and all of the crazy things that were going on.
What's it called again?
It's just called Babies. It's on Netflix if you have a Netflix subscription. Anyways, the little baby in Africa is like a living testament to what it looks like to be raised in a relational world, which is very, very different from kids here in North America. That baby at any given time has like, I mean, he knows who his mom is, so don't get me wrong there. He has a special big person, and it's very clear who his special big person is. In fact, there's a scene where his mom is sitting down and she's just finished feeding him, and he now has a little baby. Keep in mind, they're only followed till their first birthday in the film, and by the end of the film, he has a little baby sibling, right? So his little baby sibling had had something to eat, and he had just finished having something to eat, and his mother's breasts are out and available, like that's just how it goes. And then another child crawls up and thinks that it's gonna have a little something to eat from his mom, and he's like, and he gets very territorial about who his mother is. So he's very clear on who his mother is, but he has like 27 mothers around him all the time. And all of those mothers have little ones who are around him all the time. Like, think about what his day-to-day experience is of living on this planet. It is constant relational connection with human beings. Constant. That's what nature intended. That's how kids are supposed to grow up, right? And so we need to be mindful that our kids already are in a world that isn't really working well for them, and then technology has come along and is catastrophically interfering. So the question then becomes, why is technology catastrophically interfering? Like, how did it sink its teeth into us so deeply that we cannot wrest ourselves away from its grasp? How did that happen? And that actually becomes central to us understanding what went down in that Harvard chat room, right? And so the idea initially, as the World Wide Web was becoming a thing, and Google was becoming a thing, and all of those incredible ways of accessing information were becoming available to us, we became aware and kind of enthralled with the idea that we could use technology to allow us to gather and organize all different kinds of information, right? And how spectacular would that be? However, we are human beings. We are a social species by design. And so we crave, need social connection. We need it, right? And so rather than allowing technology to help us gather and organize information, what quickly started to happen, because we're so focused on connection. And it's not just that we want it, but we need it. What happened is that because our brains know that, they're going to kind of jump in and organize themselves and our behavior around our most intense need, which is attachment. And so we thought we were going to use technology to help us organize information and gather information, but in fact, our attachment cells worked it. And we started to use it to connect with one another. And then, because we so need and crave and desire that connection, it got bigger and bigger and bigger and further watered down and became the big beast that it really is today, where it has started to interfere with how the attachment needs of our children and ourselves are being met. And don't think that it's just kids that are being affected by this. Adults are being affected by this. The more time you spend on social media, the more depressed you are. And it's not necessarily that social media is depressing you, although if you're following along with everybody's Pinterest posts and everything else and you realize like you are a horrible mother who never plans the perfect birthday party with the color coordinated ABC and XYZ and all that, you could feel depressed. I don't know. But rather that the lower we are, the more we start to seek out the hits of connection, and so the more we're kind of plugged into that. The problem is, that's not where we were meant to get our connection from. We're meant to get our connection from each other, like staring at one another and having all the nonverbals and interacting, is it getting weird? Interacting back and forth. You and that, right now, right? That's very different than a like on Facebook or whatever it is. By the way, teenagers aren't on Facebook anymore. That's like super old school. And so, because we're going to organize ourselves around our most intense need, we started to use technology to serve the need of connection. And then the other issue is that technology revolution came on fast and came on hard. Now, if you look back in our society, any other big revolution that's happened has happened over the span of, 100, 150 years. And so as that's playing out, we develop social safeguards and systems in order to kind of protect our needs and protect ourselves in the face of that revolution, be it the Industrial Revolution or whatever it is, right? But when a revolution settles in this fast, this hard, within a generation, right? Facebook didn't become a thing until 2003, when my son was just being born. I remember I started university in 1993. I remember getting my first email account when I was like in second year maybe. And we used to go line up at the library at UBC for like 2 hours for our 10 minutes on the computers, the communal computers, to send an email to our mom or whatever, right? That all happened like in the last 20, 25 years. And so the technology revolution has come on very fast and very hard, and what it means is that we did not have time to think proactively and preventatively around what we needed to put in place in order to safeguard ourselves and safeguard our children against the scourge of technology. And then alongside all of that, that's been playing out at a time when our children have really become quite vulnerable. And what I mean by vulnerable is children today need their big people more than children have ever needed big people in the history of time. Because we're stressed, we're overwhelmed, we are dealing with the intensity of big expectations on ourselves as big people, but also on our children at younger and younger and younger ages, right? All of that creates need in kids, need for connection with their big people, to be settled and soothed and regulated. And so children today, just because of all of that, are vulnerable. And now, at a time when they most need connection, it's become incredibly readily available in a surface, watered down way. That's the catastrophic interference that screens have created in terms of the connection needs of kids and those connection needs being addressed via screens. Ugh. Right? When you think about that, that's terrifying. So when I said it's very readily available, kids need connection more than they've ever needed it. You all need connection now more than you've ever needed it too, because your lives are very busy and overwhelming and intense. And so it becomes really readily available via screens and technology. And remember I said, but it's surface and it's watered down. And so what is the problem? Why am I going, ugh, surface and watered down? Well, the first thing is that on a screen, the connection can never be big enough and welcoming enough, right? Think of what it is for a child to walk into a room and you see them and you just you come alive for them. You literally invite them to exist in that moment. And there's so much going on in the social dance that's created between you and them in that moment, and it's settling in through their skin, and it's settling in through their ears, and it's settling in through all of their senses and becoming wired up in their brain in terms of their soul, but also in terms of their regulatory core. You can never create that kind of an experience with a text message. You just can't. It's not how it's going to happen. And you can never create that kind of experience on social media. It's all surface. It's not going to go deep, right? The other issue is that when we're connecting through social media and screens, the focus is really superficial. You never get beyond the early stages of relationship development. And so the early stages are we come together in terms of the surface roots of attachment. We come together through sameness. That's second year life stuff. That's not big, profound attachment. It's second year of life attachment. We want to be the same as you. So then what do? We join a forum for a bunch of people that have a similar interest to us and whatever. But that's superficial. You're not developing deep connections via that superficial kind of a focus. The third thing is that when you're connecting through screens, you're in constant appearance management. So you're not posting stuff online or presenting yourself to others online in a way that you haven't actually thought about first, right? You're managing that. You're posting the best picture. You're writing only the wittiest response. You're really managing all of that, and your kids are doing the same thing, right? Now the issue is that you can't actually, so the deepest root of attachment is not being loved. It goes one deeper. It's being known. That in spite of the good, the bad, the ugly, everything in between, you are loved and known, right? When you can be known, that's when the good stuff happens. And so when you're constantly in appearance management mode, nobody really knows you. And if nobody really knows you, then you won't feel that deep, squishy, gushy stuff of being known. And social media and screen connections will rob you of that. Now, we are wired up as human beings to seek out contact and closeness until we are satiated. And so you'll see little ones who will drive at that until it makes you crazy. Because they need to be satiated in their fix. They need enough connection to have been filled up to the point that they're overflowing, and only then will they venture forth from their secure base. That would be the person that filled them up until they were overflowing with connection, right? And then when that's all settled, then they venture forth. Then they're interested in the world. Then they sort of seek out other kinds of things, right? And they'll come at you, and behaviors will get really interesting and big and crazy and overwhelming, and they'll keep driving at it until they've been satiated. Now the problem is, via screens, you're never going to quite get your fill. What do you think it creates? Addiction, right? So you're constantly coming back for the hit because you never quite got the fill, right? And then the final thing is that screens are actually spoiling your appetite for what is truly needed. It's a little bit like having dessert first. You have, let's say, I don't know, chocolate cake, whatever your thing is. So you have dessert, and then set in front of you is the most scrumptious meal really nutritious, really tasty, really fantastic, and you're like, meh, don't really want it. Not hungry, because you've gotten the fill of the dessert first, right? And so that's what screens and social media are doing to our kids, and they're doing it to all of you too. Is that you're eating dessert first. They are eating dessert first, and now you come forward, so you get home from work or you present yourself to them, and you think, oh, you're so full of invitation for them to exist, but they've already been fed. They don't want it, right? And so, we need to figure it out. Now, do we feel like we want to break? Because we had a little bit of an interruption. I don't know. How y'all doing? Hands up, so anybody who wants 5 minutes to stretch legs and use the bathroom. One person. Off you go. Okay, let's take a very short break just in case anybody needs to stretch legs or use the washroom. And then we'll come right back. So it's 10:43. I'm starting again at 10:50. 7 minutes.
I'm gonna have.
And where we're going to pick up is talking about screen exposure and what the expert recommendations are around screen time limits. So the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Canadian Pediatric Society recommend that for kids 0 to 2 years of age, no screens, period, including background television. So all of it off. 3 to 5 years, 1 hour total. And 6 to 18 years, 2 hours total.
For how long a period?
For a day.
For a day.
So children are presently using 4 to 5 times the amount of technology recommended by pediatric experts. And the issue is that in that sort of hyper feeding on the technology, they miss out on childhood. Go ahead.
So are they like even saying like, you know, you're feeding your baby and watching TV? Like that's not at all, right? Like you're
That toddler watching your show and the baby is there.
Pardon me?
You've got a toddler that you are restricting your time, and you have a baby in the house, and technically.
But you're not going to wreck the toddler by depriving them of television, right?
And how many moms are up in the middle of the night watching TV for an hour while they breastfeed? Like,
It shows how pervasive it is.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
it's
healthy
everywhere.
Yeah.
When you try to.
Yeah, and even just how we've organized ourselves, like how we, like what we sort of do in a day and deem normal and typical, and then it's this sort of jarring reality that we have to like revisit that because it's not really working for us, right? And you're right, it's become habitually just a part of how we are. Yeah. No. So let's check this out. So this is the age of the child, and I've actually added in this word, the developmental age, because if you have a child who emotionally is developmentally immature, you're going to want to stream them in wherever they're sort of most fit as far as their emotional age and stage rather than their chronological age and stage, right? Because you'll be wanting to do right by their brain emotionally, and so you'll be wanting to come alongside. And so if you have a child who's between 0 and 2, this is like nothing, so that's a really easy row. If you have a child who's between 3 and 5 years of age, how much? An hour a day. Is nonviolent television okay? Yes. Or handheld devices okay? No. Nonviolent video games? No. Violent video games? No. And then online video gaming. Age 6 to 12 is 2 hours. Nonviolent television, okay. Handheld devices? No. And everything after that, a no. And then 13 to 18-year-olds, 2 hours a day as well. Nonviolent TV, fine. Handheld devices, okay. Nonviolent video games, a limit to half an hour. Violent video games. Online gaming. Never. Now, so somebody says interesting. Why do we think the online gaming has been given the big old veto? By let's just like look at who's talking this through. So Chris Rowan's involved in this. There's a couple other like psychiatrists and early child development folks involved, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the Canadian Pediatric Society. So it's not like somebody sat in their living room and made it up, right? So why the online video gaming and obviously pornography? Why is it never okay?
It's the addiction, and then there's the, like, you know, with the video games, I don't know if you've ever heard them interacting, but they can wear the headphones, and then there's bullying going on.
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of gross stuff that happens in the midst of all of that. And the issue then becomes that if you're spending even half an hour a day engaged in that kind of stuff, that then you've substituted real human interaction with weird human interaction. Right? And why would you want to do that to yourself? Like, why would you want to, like, mess it up? Like, why do that? Why mess it up? Why get in the way of it? And so they're just saying, no. Yeah.
Where does school...
Wow, this is the slide, right? Go.
Where does school and work fit into the
Yeah,
numbers?
so that's a slightly different use of screens and technology. So I'll give you an example. One of my children has a learning disability, a written output disorder, and or dysgraphia we call it. And so has to be on a keyboard in order to communicate in the written form, because writing it out just is never going to work for him. And so we wouldn't be including that in his screen time because he's on the keyboard for the purpose of expressing in the written form a story or whatever it is that's happening in his head. He's not interacting with the screen. There's nothing coming back at him from the screen except that he's seeing his story appear on the screen. And so when we're using it sort of educationally like that, and be careful with that, because very quickly now you're on to all these learning websites where now they're not being taught by human beings. They're you know, so you have to be careful around how far and how big you're going to go with that. But when it's a very sort of straight up, crisp kind of use of technology in the way that I just described to you for my son, that wouldn't be part of what we're talking about. That's making kids fat as far as their screen exposure goes. For adults, I mean, I don't know, but I spent 7 hours yesterday, probably, as attributed by all of the muscles on the right side of my body, using the mouse, writing reports. And so that's just my work. Like, I'm not interacting with the report, sort of. But there isn't anything coming back at me. Do you get it? Like, it hasn't become an interaction, it's my work. I'm dumping into this Word document what it is that I'm creating for the purpose of making sure those 2 kids get funded in September.
Okay.
And I got them both done. Which, after a full day of work, got 2 reports done. I feel like I should, I don't know, I'm gonna go shopping.
Retail.
Right? Little reward. And so, I don't remember your question. Did I address it?
You did.
Okay. Yes.
So I did have one comment. I think it's very interesting that they're marketing baby iPads and stuff in the toy store. That drives me crazy. These little stroller things you can attach the iPad to the stroller.
It's terrible.
So that's my little comment of, are you crazy? I wish the Pediatric Society could get over those people. But the other thing was kind of related to that. The school is sending home, because I have a daughter who is like addicted. When you put a screen in front of her, she's like, she talks all the time. When you put that screen in front of you, your words, and she doesn't eat, she doesn't eat, she doesn't blah. So I'm like, I'm not reading screen because her mom is giving her these things. They are completely removed right now. So now the school is sending home, oh, this math program, we would like you to upload this math program. This is going to be part of our curriculum. I'm like, I am trying so hard to limit everything. You guys are pushing. Is that, like, we didn't sign up for the thing, and I'm thinking, oh, am I depriving her of her education? What's wrong with the worksheets like we did in the olden days?
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm going to give you a soft answer because I know some of those math programs, and my kid's school is using probably something similar. And you actually just answered your own question in or responded to your own comment, I think, in something that you said, which is, what's wrong with the worksheet? And so if the math program is basically a worksheet in a digital form, have at her. But if the math program becomes the teacher and the da-da, and now we're into it, and we're trying to earn points, and we're winning, and we're doing this, then that's a whole other beast. Like, that just is, we don't need that. You know, if you've been to my discipline workshop, you know how I feel about rewards anyways, and so I just think, why get them focused on points and stars and whatever? It robs them of their true desire to learn. But if it's just a substitution for a worksheet, then my feeling about it is there's no harm done, because it's the same thing as my son using the keyboard to print, because he can't use his hands to print, right? But it's a slippery slope. And what you'll find then is maybe you're like, okay, we'll use that program, but we're only using it as like worksheet substitution. So you're on the screen where they're literally like clicking in their answers to their math facts or whatever. But then all of a sudden, sparkling in the right-hand corner of the screen are all these other things that they could do. And so then it can become sort of this big battle, because you're constantly shutting it all down. And if I were you, I'd just be printing out the worksheet.
I haven't even looked, I don't know what the program is, but I just looked at the notes. I feel like it's about
Yeah. I'm going to go behind you, and then I'm hopping forward to you. Yeah.
I kind of likened it when I was raising my kids, who are now 28 and 25. There was a huge push that my kids were going to miss out unless they were involved in absolutely everything at a really early age. Unfortunately, as a single parent, I don't need money. And I actually had one close friend, and we both decided we were not going to buy into this philosophy that our kids were going to miss out.
Warrior!
And I didn't go to all the workshops on, how to prepare your kid for grad presentation. I said to my kids, what's your job? Why is it my job to do that? And I had a friend, right? And I managed to go through raising my kids without buying into it, but I had support. And when teachers would give me a hard time, I had somebody else who would say, you know what, I agree. And I had a couple of other family friends that helped me. Our kids had similar values. So that's who we hung out with, because it was too stressful with those other families whose kids were involved in activities 8 hours a day after school, which I couldn't afford. So I think it's possible, but you need support, and you need other kids who are in families where there's similar philosophies. They sound smart.
Workshop's over. Yes, absolutely yes. And you've landed on so many things. Village being so important. We're going to talk about village and having your village around you as you sort of work through this. Not buying into the party line, not going with the flow, and being prepared in a way to swim upstream, because you're going to be working against a lot of things that have become habitual in terms of how we conduct our lives, and people are going to think you're weird, or you're difficult, or you're, not up with the times your kids are never getting into university, whatever it is. So you have to be prepared to take a stand in the name of child development, and sometimes that feels yucky and uncomfortable, and you're right. You need to have your support circles around you so that you feel like you're being championed in doing what you know to be right intuitively for your kids. Yeah. Yes. That's become part of like the other seedy underbelly of the technology revolution, is that we have access to insane amounts of information, which we then try to gobble up and barf out all over our kids to make them better, to grow them better, to do all these things. But sometimes we just, like I'm always saying to big people, you're working too hard. Like, you don't need to. Just sit back and let it happen. They're created in this perfect way to grow spectacularly, given the right conditions around them. So just watch that, and it'll happen. Right? Okay. So what is your score? So are you a light user, a moderate user, a heavy user, or a fat user? Light user, 1 to 2 hours a day. Moderate,
2 to 4, heavy, 4 to 6, fat, greater than 6. So then what does your intervention need to be in terms of the length of your technology intervention? If you're a light user and you just want to get it addressed and nipped in the bud and down to what it needs to be, you're going to go at the intervention for 1 to 2 weeks, moderate. Do you see it's sort of matching roughly with the number of hours you're using a day? That's the number of weeks. 4 to 6 hours, 4 to 7 weeks, greater than 6 hours, greater than 6 weeks. And so what do we mean by technology intervention? Dun, dun. This is the part where we talk about what are we going to do about it. But the first thing is that we have to have a few pieces in place before you even engage in a technology intervention, because if you haven't thought through these things, you're going to be derailed before you even begin. So the first thing to think about, number one, you have to be in charge of the relationship that you have with that child. You be in charge. You're taking care of it. You're creating space for it. You're righting it when it goes sideways. You're apologizing even if it wasn't your fault. You're making that relationship happen. You've owned it. You've taken it on. You've acknowledged that that is your central role, is to ensure the relationship is happening with the child in the way that nature intended, which is what we talked about at the last workshop. Number two, are you full of swagger? Because if you're going to your kids and you're like, so, like, do you think, I was thinking you would, how do you feel about that? They're going to be like, what up? And no. Right? That's not swagger. You have to have swagger. You need to be able to throw your shoulders back and stick out your chin and have a confident voice and say, no, this is how it is. And I love you. Right? Swagger isn't being mean. Swagger is being full tilt, in charge, and on it. It's how you walk, it's how you talk, it's how you sort of flow into the space in the moment so that you have presence as a big person. If you do not have swagger, they will smell it on you from miles away and you'll never get in there. So you have to have swagger as you flow into, in particular, something as significant as trying to get underneath a technology addiction. Number three, how full is your own cup? Like, are you in a good place? Or are you in a terrible place? Are you really stressed out and life is overwhelming, you just started a new job and you just moved and you've got boxes to unpack or whatever it is? Are you flooded right now? Then don't do this right now. Bad idea. It's going to end catastrophically bad, right? And so just hold on. Another week or two is not going to ruin them any more than they're already ruined, right? Get your cup filled up. Make sure you got some resources on board so that you've got what you need to be able to head into this and stick it out. Because there is going to be a little bit of like gumption required in the early days of a technology intervention. And then the fourth thing, which we had landed on a little bit earlier, is your village on board? So when your kid goes over to play at somebody else's house, have you recruited them to be part of this technology intervention? Are the other people who look after your child on board with all of this? When you're going over to the big, I don't know, multi-family summer barbecue and you know that all the kids are going to be in the back casita gaming, real life instance in my life, last summer, we took our kids out streets for 8 weeks last summer. It was awesome. How are you going to handle that? Have you talked to all the other parents about what you got going on? Have you figured out a way through that so you don't sort of walk everybody in to this kind of landmine? Have you got your village on board? And so these are all the things that I would just be really encouraging you to think through and make sure it's all happening. You're going to need that relationship in the most spectacular way if you're trying to get in underneath a technology addiction for a child that you're caring for. And so make sure that's there, make sure you got your swagger on, make sure you've got enough resources on board to be able to stick it out, and make sure the people around you are also invested in what you've decided to do. And if they're not, guess what? If they're not invested, then probably you're not spending a ton of time around them while you're getting this accomplished, right? And that's just what you do, because you're not here in the service of them. You're here in the service of that child or these children. That's your job. All the big people in all the land everywhere,
You are here in the service of the children you are growing up. You are not here in the service of the other big people. They're already grown up, sort of. Some of them. Okay? I often get asked in this workshop, well, how do I know if they're addicted? So I'm going to land on that very quickly. Technology addiction happens because we have this intense need of connection, which we talked about, and we have a superficial but readily available access to this attachment via screens, which leads them to that technology addiction. It happens supernaturally. Like, we should not be surprised about this, right? They're addicted to it because they need it. And you do, and you do, and you do, and you do, and all of you do. It's just that they become addicted because they're getting it in superficial ways. They never quite get enough of it, so they're constantly going back to feed again and again and again and again. They haven't been satiated. How do you know if it's an addiction? Number one, if you can't get them on board and have them fall into the routines that you've set out, with swagger, with right relationship, with the people around you supporting you, right? Number two, when they have no drive or interest in anything else, when their entire universe, and you'll know if you've seen a child who's really addicted, it is like jaw-dropping how central it becomes to their entire world. And number three is if they need it. I had a boy, 16 years old. His parents decided to lock down their computer room at night because he was going down and gaming all night long World of Warcraft with kids on the other side of the world. That's what he was doing. And they were not pleased with this. He wasn't going to school because he was up all night, so he was sleeping all day. All these things were happening. They locked down their computer room. Well, he went down at 2 o'clock in the morning, and not only did he break the door down, he took the entire door frame off the wall. So desperate was he to get at that computer, right? So if they need it that way, then it's an addiction. Now be aware, cold turkey technology removal can create very perilous fallout. And so you have to sort of wander into it and get it figured out, and there's sort of like ways to step in, ways to gradually sort of titrate down, taper off so that there isn't this catastrophic removal. You might think about engaging some alternative behaviors first and making sure that your connection with the child is really blooming first. Because those things, what's the screen doing? It's feeding that need for connection. So start to feed the need somewhere else first. And then as you start to pull the screens out, you'll have this natural opportunity to sort of zoom in with the real connection that they're going to need. And then gradually, and without parade, you begin the removal. And what might that look like? Well, that might look like you're going from 4 hours to 3 hours to 2 hours to 1 hour over a course of 2 or 3 weeks even, depending on what you need, depending how full your cup is, depending how, like where you're at with all of that and how you're going to wander in. It might be that you're setting up, and we're going to talk through some of these, setting up preventative things, like we only are on our phones when we're sitting around the kitchen counter between the hours of 3 and 5 p.m. Like if you want to be on your phone, that's where you do it and that's when you do it. And otherwise, phones are all docked here. Right? So you'll come up with ways, and I'll talk you through some of those, that you're going to sort of start to get in and get under it. Now, when we did this last summer with our boys, we didn't have like a big family meeting. And we didn't say, boys, it's become too much, because we had looked around, I had looked around, and I was like, huh, so interesting that Dr.Vanessa Lapointe's own children. I feel like this got away from us a little in the last 6 weeks of school. And so I thought, you know what, here's what we're going to do. We're just going to not do it anymore. And then 1 week turned to 2 weeks, became the full summer, and it was like a nothing. But I didn't sit them down and like read them the riot act and tell them everything and da 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 da. I just, with swagger and with confidence, slowly stepped into it, right? And so one morning Maxwell went down to go and turn on the PS4. And he's like, the TV's not working. And I said, I know, I took the cord out of it. And he's like, well, why would you do that? And I was like, well, we're just not going to turn it on today. And he was like, huh. Okay. Right? And then 5 minutes later, can I have the cord for the TV, Mom? And I was like, no. It's put away for now. But I really want it. I know you do. If I were you, I'd want it too. No. but I really want it. I know you do. We'll talk about it later. The answer's a no, right? The first week was kind of like that, and then it just became a non-event. It was just a big
replace it
old
with that morning?
What's that?
What did he do to replace it?
Oh, I don't even remember. We got really into geocaching, which they love. Have you ever done that?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, it's so much fun. It's like a treasure hunt. There's probably a geocache right outside this building and you don't even know.
I think she put
Afraid of what's in the wall.
Needles. My boys spend a ton of time down at the beach. We're part of a sort of multi-generation swim beach club situation in the summer, so they spend a lot of time doing that. They're out on the water, they're going to barbecues, summer
It's what we
vacations.
did last generation, that's what they did.
Yeah, yes. It's a good question, because what do you do? And is there some time where they're wandering around, I'm bored? Yes. Don't we love it when kids are bored? We do. Because in boredom, they find themselves. They find their creativity. They find their own genius. You have to have some stick-to-itiveness, right? Because the broken record will play, I'm bored, I'm bored, I'm bored. And you have to just be able to be like, I love bored. Bored is so awesome. Right? Was I telling you guys, I feel like I told you guys last workshop that I wrote a blog post on boredom about this time last year. That ended up getting picked up by the World Economic Forum, which is like a huge international organization. And to date, that blog post on why boredom is so central, which by the way, I wrote in 20 minutes. There was actually like spelling errors and stuff in it that I had to go back really quickly and fix. It's been viewed about 70 million times. And it's not because I'm anybody special. It's not because the World Economic Forum was like, oh, Dr.Vanessa wrote a blog post, let's put it up. That's not what it is. It's because we're coming back to this, like kids need to be bored. That is part of healthy child development, where you have to sit with your own self and be like, now what? Right? And then your voice comes alive, like your self comes alive, and you actually figure out who you are. Go.
We talk about it like if our family is doing something and it's fun, but we need to stop doing it because it's time to do something else, then we say, this was a fun thing to do. So the next time we're looking for something to do, let's remember this one, or let's make a list, or so that when it's after school and they're running around the house with balloons, beating each other and driving me crazy and I need to make dinner, we revisit that, oh, wait, what was on that list of other things that we can do, instead of just going and turning on the TV or off. So in those moments of non-boredom, we make mental notes and lists to revisit them. So it's when that time comes, we don't melt down.
Yeah. And my 10-year-old son has a box in his room of like things. And it's all like that. It's like weird science tornado things that he can make in a pop bottle and stuff like that. But sometimes I want for him to not even go there. Sometimes I want for him to just be like out of his mind bored. And really awesome things happen. If you can just like hold them there, really cool stuff can come out of it. But it takes a little bit of gumption and a whole lot of swagger, because they will make you crazy while they're trying to find their inner self. Okay, let's talk about, excuse me, taking a technology holiday as part of your intervention. And so we talked about how long that would last, and we went through all those numbers. The number one thing for you to know, if you're going to introduce a technology holiday as part of your intervention, it is not as a consequence. They are not being consequenced for having been on their screens too much. If you do it as a consequence, you ruin it. Whose job was it to stay on top of the screen exposure to begin with?
Yeah, ours.
It's your job. It's not their job. So now you're just going to do your job. And they're not getting in trouble for that. This is not a consequence. We, by the way, don't believe in consequencing ever. We, the royal we. So it's not a consequence. You're just putting things into place that you know to be healthy and helpful for them. And you're going to get on top of that and make it happen. The other piece that I will say is if you are thinking about medicating a child, and by the way, don't read me as an anti-medication person. I'm all over that. in the right situation, right? I have seen children's lives turned around by being put on a stimulant or having access to an anxiolytic or having access to an antidepressant. It can save your life. It can turn everything around if that is in fact what you needed. Okay, so I'm not anti-medication. However, if you have a child who's struggling with attention, struggling with anxiety, struggling with depression or any kind of mood-related thing, try a technology intervention first, particularly if you think their technology use is a bit fat. And see what happens. And give it a few weeks and see what happens, and then revisit the medication piece after that. Second to this technology intervention, think about how you're going to flow in and do some relationship building. And first in this is get off your screens. So as the adults, you wander into this as the warriors that you are and come off of your screen so that you can connect to your children or the children that you are growing up in the way that they need for you to be connected to them. And you're going to hold yourself to the same tech holiday and the same tech limits as your children. So when we say that there are no screens meant to be anywhere that was traditionally together time, the dinner table, I don't know, car rides. What are the traditional times that we would have historically spent together? And we're going to ban screens from all of those kinds of times. If you've told your children that they're off their screens, when they're in the living room hanging out as a family or when you're at the dinner table or whatever, then you better be off your screen as well, right? Not just to set the example, but to be available to them as a human being. You're going to declare sacred times as tech-free. So we started to land on this just a second ago. Any time of the day that's been historically and culturally intended for togetherness needs to be a tech-free time of the day. So meal times, tech-free. No TV on in the background. And no screens at the table. Family evening time, tech-free. Bedtime, tech-free. Especially bedtime. They need a big dose of you at bedtime because they're about to head into, 8 to 11 hours of not having you in the world of sleep. They need you. That's why kids kind of go a little at bedtime, because they need a big dump of you, and they are about to head into a bunch of separation because they're going to sleep, right? You don't want to fill that with technology. You want to fill that with yourself. That's what they need from you. Have your morning begin with connection. So the rule in our house is no screens before people. Why? You've just come through 8 to 11 hours of not having had anybody, right? Because you've been asleep. You need to get topped up. I want you topped up. I want you full of me, humanity, first and foremost. And any other typical family kind of time or togetherness kind of time, those are the tech-free times. Further, in making sure that your relationship building is part of your tech intervention, make sure that you are a provider. Your kids need to know your bigness, even though they know way more about screens than you do. Don't let them dethrone you. Don't farm out. You know, we put our kids in all these summer camps and other activities, which maybe we need to do for childcare or whatever, but don't farm that out to other people. The teaching of hobbies, the teaching of skills, the teaching of all of those kinds of things. Own it. Like, get big for them. What can you do? What do you offer them? How are you big in their eyes, right? My dad is a Red Seal chef. Awesome. And I remember when Nathan, who's now 13, when he was 5, my dad was over. They live in Alberta, and they had come for a visit, and he was trying to sell a guitar online. He also has what he calls GAS, Guitar Acquisition Syndrome, where he collects guitars. And so he was trying to sell a guitar, and he needed to post it on Craigslist or something, I don't even remember. And he was on my laptop, and he was getting very frustrated because he didn't know how to use the touch mouse. And so there he is in his grandpa-ness, sitting at the table getting frustrated, and my little 5-year-old wanders over to him, and he's like, "Grandpa, double click like this." And I was like, first of all, how do you know that? And secondly, how dare you think you are bigger than your grandpa? Like, that was my, if I'm really honest, that was my like reaction. Anyway, so I had been thinking about that. Fast forward a few years, when Nathan was 10, my dad and his wife came to visit again. And my dad is this, like the food that he can create would blow your mind. And so we decided that we were going to have a big family meal and invite my aunt and uncle and some other people over. And my dad arrived on the Friday, and the dinner was going to be on Saturday. Guess what started on Friday? With Nathan, who'd become very interested in the world of cooking. Well, they sat down together and they made a menu. And from the menu, they made a shopping list. And from the shopping list, they hit up like, you know, the 12 different grocery stores and specialty shops that they needed to get to this, the whole day Saturday, pulling all of the ingredients together, and my dad teaching him about cuts of meat and this and all of that kind of stuff, right? And then came the pre-prep where they had to prepare bisques and all this other stuff Saturday evening, and then Sunday morning they're up early, like the whole thing. And Nathan, the same child who was like, Grandpa, double click, was just like, oh my God, my grandpa is amazing. Because there's my grandpa showing me this incredible skill, right? Get big for your kids. You own it for them. Be full of swagger. Have them looking to you so that you've maintained your place of provider to them. Okay? Number 4, fill them up. You want to make sure that you are in right connection with them. You don't want to be barking at them about the technology intervention. You've got to come alongside in order to get them on side. Meet them where they're at. Join with them in their misery about all of this. Let them know you get it. Empathize with them. Understand them. Meet them where they're at. If they're landing on something that they're interested in, follow that. Dig down that rabbit hole with them. Get excited about all of that with them so that they can feel you sort of coming in and filling them up with all of that connection. Read together, walk together, play together, eat together. Wake up 15 minutes earlier every day so that you have time to collect them, fill them up, top them up, satiate them before you send them out into their day, right? Look for all of these ways to be really available to kids so that they're getting their biggest, fullest fill of you. And you can also make technology work for you. There's Maxwell going to sleep while I'm in a hotel room in Smithers on Skype, laying on my pillow beside him, right? So there's ways to kind of make technology work for you. Number 3, as part of your technology intervention, introduce some competition. So you want to have other things coming in alongside. Actually schedule something for each day of the week. What do you do on Mondays? Maybe Mondays is pizza night. What do you do Tuesdays? Is that basketball night? Wednesdays, geocaching night? Thursdays, pull it all together night. You're having leftovers, you're getting all the homework cleared out, whatever you're doing, right? Fridays, village night. That's what we do on Fridays. We connect with our village over at friends or friends over at our place or whatever we're doing. We're having village night. And so you can think about actually creating some structure in your week, not just to keep you on track, because it will actually be really helpful to you if you have that structure, but also so that the kids have some sort of expectation of what's coming and something to kind of land on and hang their star on. Play together. Be out in nature together. You can even go back to your kids and brainstorm ideas about what they would love, right? Which is, I think, a little bit about what you were talking about. And then the other part of this, in terms of introducing competition, bored is not bad. Bored is so beautiful. It's so good. Create space for boredom. And when kids come to you and be like, I'm bored, you know what I want you to say back to them? I love bored. And they'll be like, I'm crazy. Say yes, but let them be bored. And then number 4, what is your plan ongoing? So what are you going to do preventatively to make sure that this all gets held in place so that you're not slipping back into old ways? Have a central place in your home for technology storage. So where are the handhelds docked? Where are the controllers for your consoles held? So that everything's managed, right? And not because you're being big and gross about it, but because you're being in charge of it. You're being the provider and you're creating some structure around that. Have a central place in your home for technology usage. Do not let your children be retreating to bedrooms to get fat on technology devices, right? You understand what I mean by fat. Yeah. No technology in bedrooms or dining rooms or any other zone of connection in your home. Those places are sacred. You need to reserve them for their sacred purpose. Have clearly understood understood routines and structures around technology use times a day. No screens before people, as an example, right? Amount of time per day. Use visual timers. Do you know what a visual timer looks like? Because I don't know about you guys, but if my boys, for example, were to be playing a game, and I were to come in and say it's done, they're like, what? No fair! That can't be half an hour. And so if you use a visual timer, they see the time disappearing, so they're able to sort of like make a connection to that. And also, it's okay to have a snooze button, because sometimes they need to reach like a certain point in the game where they lose all their progress, and then you end up having a big 20-minute discussion about how it wasn't fair that you turned it off because they lost, blah, blah, blah. So it's fine to push a snooze button 5 more minutes. And wherever you are in 5 minutes, then that's it, right? Make sure you're monitoring for content, and make sure that you also have rules for technology use outside of your home. So when you land at your friend's house, and we're over at so-and-so's house, what does that look like? And the other thing that I would encourage you around in terms of your preventative plan going forward is to offset screen exposure. So for every hour or every half hour that a child has on a screen, they have equal time moving in connection out in nature. So you're offsetting it and making sure that they're getting that exposure to the other pieces that they need. Here are some resources for you. I put a lot of those sort of technology intervention tips, if you will, on a little downloadable sheet that you can print, and it's got all pretty graphics and stuff on it. This is Chris Rowan and her workshop. The latest edition of Gordon Neufeld's book, Hold On to Your Kids, has a chapter in it on screens and technology, which is worth a read. The ahaparenting.com website, which I love, and she's got a lot of stuff up there on screens. She's super fascinating. She didn't let her children watch TV ever until they were 18.
Wow.
There's also a book called The Big Disconnect, Protecting Childhood and Family Relationships in the Digital Age, which, if this is a sort of thing for you, you might want to have a read of that. And otherwise,
Good. Thank you, Vanessa. Right at 11:30. Thank you guys for coming. These dates again, September, October, November dates for Dr. Lapointe or other clinicians from the Wishing Star,
That's right,
depending
yeah.
on the topic. And I am back in this room tomorrow at 10 o'clock for 2 hours for a support group. So any of you that want to join us tomorrow, we will see you then. Otherwise, I'll see you in September.
and I'm very sorry, I'm on a time limit.
Yeah, go.
So I'm booking her out of here, but I look forward to seeing you all in September, and I wish you a very happy summer.
You too.